the trees in the background, I tried to make a lighter value than the tree that's closer up. That's a little thing, but that makes a big difference. That's how we create depth in our paintings, is by really paying attention to the values and those subtle differences. In today's video, I'm going to show you step by step how I paint this snow scene. The first thing that I've done is lay out my drawing, and then I'm wetting down the back and the front of the paper. A great way to get started with your scene is to identify the lightest parts of the painting. As you are painting your first wash, everywhere else around the scene can be darker than that area. So the lightest part here is going to be the snow on top of the roofs of the houses, and I know that everywhere else in the scene can be darker than that. So let's go back to the beginning of this first wash, and I've established my drawing and I've wet down the front and back of my paper. Now I'm laying in all the light in the scene. I started off with a little bit of lavender and some raw sienna. We like to think of snow as being white, but snow is a great reflector. So if there's warm light in your scene, there's a good chance the snow is going to be reflecting some of that warmth. So I like to work in a little bit of raw sienna, warmer tone into the snow, and then I combine that with some lavender. So you have a little bit warmer and a little bit cooler areas that mix on the paper. So you can see more raw sienna here, where I want the most impact of the light to be. And then the other areas, I'm mixing in some lavender, so that's cooling those areas down. And the next thing I needed to do was really think about the light that is on this house. I'm using some raw sienna light here and some more raw sienna in these areas, and building up a little bit of strength, but still keeping things nice and loose in this first wet into wet wash. And now I need to paint the sky, so I'm coming back in, laying in the blue for that sky, coming right up to where the roofs of these houses are, and it takes a little bit of control here. You don't want the blue to flow down over what you've painted here. So I'm not using a ton of water in my mixture. I'm keeping it pretty thin, not using too much water. And while the painting is still damp, this is a good time to go in and lay in some local color for some of the trees. So here I'm using some raw umber, some raw sienna, and I like dropping these in while the paper is still wet. You get a nice, soft, lost edge. And then when I go back in with my middle values, I can layer some of my middle values on top of that to really get the strength that I need. A lot of this will be painted over, but I like to leave myself some options and lay in some of that color now while everything is still damp. Up in the sky, I've used Cerulean and Cobalt Blue. Down here, I'm using a little bit of neutral tint and Cobalt Blue. And then in the snow, I used raw sienna and some lavender. And then here I used some raw sienna light. So after I'm done with the first wash, this is what it looks like. I went ahead and laid in a little bit of the cooler areas for the shadow just to start establishing that. And I have this other house over here that I really just want to be a very loose impression. I've laid in a little bit of the shadow area for that. So now that the first wash is in place, I have all my light values in the scene. Let's go ahead and get into those middle values. Once my paper has dried, I'm ready to move into the middle values of the scene. So I'm going to skip ahead and show you where we're going. That's going to include the trees in the background and connecting them right into the shadow shapes around the house to define that light area. I'm starting over on the left side of the paper. You'll notice here, I've re-wet a little bit of the sky. I like to get some soft, lost edges to really show that the trees on that part of the painting are just receding into the distance. And a good way to do that is by re-wetting an area. That way, when I go in with this brush and I paint those distant trees, I get some nice soft edges. I'm using that shape to define the top of the roof line. The middle value shape in your paintings is the trickiest part of the painting process. You have a lot to think about all at one time. You're thinking about color mixing and edges, connectivity. All of this we have to do at the same time. So having a good plan, methodically starting from one side of your painting, working your way across the scene, reloading your brush and coming back to a wet edge, all those things can help you as you work through this part of the process. So I wanted that edge to be in light. I've negatively painted around that. The color mixture here is raw sienna, neutral tint, a touch of cobalt blue to really get a nice kind of neutral gray look to those trees that are in the background. And you'll notice here I'm using a silver black velvet brush, and I really wanted to get some dry brush marks. I'm using the side of my brush to break up that area. And you'll also notice that as I get more into the middle of the painting, in the middle ground, it might be kind of hard to see, but I'm warming up my pigment a little bit. And when I say that, I'm adding in more raw sienna and burnt sienna, and I don't want it to be as dull and as cool as this is back here. So as we get closer, I want to add a little bit more warmth, a little bit more saturation to what's happening right here in this part of my painting. Now I'm coming back down to here and attaching the shadow area into this. I have an Escoda size 12 that I'm using, and I'm kind of adding in some broken shadow on the roof of that house. And here, you know, even in this little area, I like to have a mixture of warm and cool. So I mix in more of that raw sienna, burnt sienna combo with some of the cooler colors. I don't want to paint a large wash all the same color. That's how we make our paintings really boring and lifeless, is using the same mixture, the same color all over the scene. So I try to find ways to mix that up, add a little bit of variety, let those colors blend together on the paper, and let watercolor do its thing. Now I'm getting into the face of the house that's in middle value as well. And this is going to outline the back of this car. You can see here with my finger, I'm trying to break up that edge a little bit, bringing that down. And then when I get into those brick areas on the house, I laid a little bit of that warm color in the first wash. That's something, it brings a nice feeling of complexity and interest to your work when you layer those values. I know it's a small example here, but I laid in a little bit of that red, and then I come back through with my middle values and lay some more of that red over the top of it. And that layering and that complexity adds some interest to your paintings. So bringing that shadow down, I add a little bit more cobalt blue. This is all still nice and damp and malleable. And now I'm coming down to here, and I want to look for any connections between here into this house. So I found a little connection between the shadow here and the shadow underneath here. And now we're just continuing to work our way from left to right across the scene, finding those connections, trying to keep adding variety into my mixture, and trying to come back and paint from a wet edge. And there was some of the shadow from the tree landing on the roof here. And so I have my rigger brush, and I'm taking some of that same cobalt blue, cerulean blue with some neutral tint mixture, and trying to abstractly lay in some of those shadows that are cast upon this roof. And now I'm continuing my dry brush, finishing up the trees that are behind the house, connecting all of that. It's time to add a little more value on this tree. So I have some raw umber, some neutral tint, and I have this silver black velvet brush that I've been using, and I'm pulling that down, and I want to combine some of the middle value and dark of the tree, but I also want to leave a little bit of the light that I put in place in the first wash. You'll notice here that the trees in the background, I tried to make a lighter value than the tree that's closer up. That's a little thing, but that makes a big difference. Look at the strength, the difference in strength between the trees that are in the background and this tree that's here closer to us. That's how we create depth in our paintings, is by really paying attention to the values and those subtle differences between what's happening in the background and what's happening more closer up to you. I always love it when we have the light values in place, working through the middle values, and we're starting to get some of that contrast. That's when the light in the scene really becomes evident. So you'll remember I laid in the light area of the tree in the first wash, and then I just took this little brush and softened some of what I just painted. That's giving the tree more of a feeling of rounded form, and I'm able to keep a little bit of that lighter value from the first wash. I'm going to move over here and paint this smaller tree that's closer to us. I'm using a rigger brush, and I don't just want a hard, solid line for this tree. I'm using that rigger brush, kind of breaking it up, taking advantage of some of that texture that I'm creating again, to help us create depth. That's a big reason why I softened this edge back here, is to get that difference in edge. That soft edge recedes into the distance. That harder edge over the top of it pulls that area forward and is really a thing of beauty that we need to take advantage of in painting. Now I need to think about the big foreground shadow. So I've started over here at the left, and I want to bring it around and connect it wherever I can. And that's what the large connected middle value shape looks like. Now that we have that in place, let's finish up this painting with the darks and the details. I needed to put a little bit more detail here where these cars are in the middle ground. So I'm using my Escoda size 12 brush to get more detail into this scene, and I'm laying in some value for the car. And one nice thing that does is it kind of defines this snowdrift here a little bit more, or this part of the yard that's covered in snow. So once that's in place, I'm going to move over to here and start putting the darks onto the house and get that full range of values that is so important to showing light in the scene. For this, I'm using raw umber, a little bit of neutral tint, just a warmer, darker color is what I'm trying to do here. And by getting this detail in, it does a few things. It focuses the painting here in the middle, and it starts to pop this tree out and brings a feeling of finish to the middle ground of the scene. I did a thin little wash over the snow. I felt like I needed a little more value and some interest in texture here. What I ended up doing was doing that thin little wash, and then I did a little bit of dry brush to add some texture right along here. That helps this feel a little bit closer, lets this rest more into the middle of the painting. And now it's time to add some more branches and finish up this tree. And again, it's so nice, that contrast and difference in edge between the soft, more nondescript distance and the more sharp edges of the branches does a lot to bring all of this area closer to us and let the background really rest back like we want it to. So a few more little details. I thought a few little branches, things in the snow here, the little lamp here by the garage. You know, a lot of the painting process is thinking abstractly, thinking larger about the shapes and the values. This final bit of the painting process is where we really get to hone in on the little details. Joseph Spukvich calls that the jewelry of the scene. It's the things that get all the credit, but in reality, it's the values and the large shapes that are going to make your painting work. I did a little wash over the house with some raw Sienna Light to give it a little bit more texture and finish, and a few little marks here in the foreground. And there is a look at the finished painting. I hope this video was helpful for you to once again see my process in painting. I love painting snow scenes and light. It's always fun when I get to combine those things. Next week, I'm going to show you step by step how I paint this sunset and water scene. So go ahead and hit that subscribe button if you haven't done that already. Hit that bell notification. I come out with a new video every single Monday, and you're not going to want to miss any one of these. I know that I've covered a lot of ground today in this video. If you're looking for a helpful resource to help you get started in your painting, take a look at this. Have you ever been really excited about a painting and you get all set up, you find that right reference that you're excited about, and then it's time to go and you feel lost? I have a free resource that I want to give to you today that can help with these problems. My 5 steps to plan a successful watercolor painting. I walk you through the crucial planning phase of your painting that will help you understand what you're going to paint first, second, and third. The planning is really so important, especially in watercolor. This medium is harder to correct. It's so immediate. So having that plan is very important. I send you a PDF that you can download. And the great thing about this is you can have it on your phone. You could print it out. You can download this right now before you start your next painting. All you have to do is follow this link here and download my 5-step guide to planning a successful watercolor painting.